Remember that barbarian family with bizarre alien pets fighting rock monsters on a distant planet?
Here they come! Take cover! You know what to do!
The Herculoids wasn't just another Hanna-Barbera action show. It was a violent, dialogue-free experiment that proved you could traumatize children with primitive animation if the monster designs were weird enough. Today, we're counting down 20 wild facts about the strangest family in Saturday morning television history. The characters almost never spoke. The Herculoids featured remarkably minimal dialogue.
Now, my friends, we must find those snake riders. Come!
Entire episodes passed with only a dozen lines of actual speech. Xandor, Terra, and Dorno communicated primarily through grunts, gestures, and creature commands, rather than conversation. This creative decision was purely budget-driven. Voice recording cost money, while silent action scenes didn't. The near silence made the show feel primitive and alien, accidentally creating atmospheric otherworldliness through cost-cutting necessity rather than intentional artistic choice. The creatures were rejected designs from other shows. Gloop, Gleep, Egu, Tundro, and Zoc were all rejected creature concepts from previous Hanna-Barbera productions, including Space Ghost and Johnny Quest. When designers created monsters deemed too weird or unmarketable for other shows, those designs were archived.
Fire, Tundro! Destroy the core!
Herculoids producers recycled the rejected concepts, creating a team of deliberately strange creatures nobody else wanted. This explains why the creatures look visually inconsistent. They weren't designed as a cohesive team, but as random rejected concepts forced together. It was Hanna-Barbera's most violent children's show. The Herculoids featured unprecedented violence for Saturday morning television. Characters died on screen, creatures were explicitly killed, and enemies were crushed, vaporized, or torn apart weekly. Parent advocacy groups immediately complained about graphic content inappropriate for children. CBS received hundreds of complaint letters demanding toned-down violence. However, the show's ratings were strong enough that the network ignored complaints for 2 full seasons before eventually succumbing to pressure and canceling the series. Xandor was modeled on Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan. Character designers based Xandor directly on Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan. Muscular physique, minimal clothing, primitive weapon use, and protective relationship with wild creatures. The plagiarism was so obvious that Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate considered legal action for unauthorized derivative work. Hanna-Barbera's legal department argued enough differences existed, different planet, family unit, alien creatures, to avoid copyright infringement. The estate ultimately decided against expensive litigation, though internal documents show they considered the character blatant Tarzan ripoff. The show had no consistent antagonists. Unlike contemporary action cartoons featuring recurring villains, the Herculoids introduced new enemies every episode who were killed or driven away permanently. This episodic structure prevented character development and ongoing storylines. The lack of recurring villains resulted from producers wanting self-contained episodes that could air in any order for syndication flexibility. However, it made the show feel repetitive. Every episode featured the same plot structure, with interchangeable antagonists attacking the planet for resources. Gloop and Gleep were the same character twice. Gloop and Gleep were identical blob creatures, differentiated only by size. One was larger, one smaller, but they had identical abilities, appearances, and characterizations. This redundancy existed because toy manufacturers wanted multiple creatures to sell as separate action figures, despite being functionally identical. Writers struggled to justify having 2 identical characters and frequently forgot which was which during script development. Voice actor Don Messick performed both, using indistinguishable vocal sounds. The animation budget was only $2,800 per episode. Each 10-minute segment cost approximately $2,800. extraordinarily cheap even by 1967 limited animation standards. The minimal budget forced extreme shortcuts, static backgrounds, minimal character movement, and recycled action sequences appearing in multiple episodes. Approximately 35% of every episode consisted of stock footage, transformation sequences, creature attacks, and explosion effects reused constantly. The cheap production values made the show feel crude and unfinished, though children apparently didn't care if the monster fights were exciting enough. Tara had literally nothing to do. Tara, the only female character, served absolutely no narrative function beyond occasionally screaming warnings or expressing concern. She possessed no special abilities, never fought enemies, and contributed nothing to problem solving. Even by regressive 1960s standards, the characterization was offensively useless. She existed purely as visual presence to indicate Xandor had a wife. Voice actress Virginia Gregg later complained she recorded maybe 20 lines total across 18 episodes, calling Tara the most pointless character I ever voiced. The planet Quasar had no consistent geography. The planet's landscape changed completely between episodes with no continuity. Sometimes desert, sometimes jungle, sometimes rocky wasteland, sometimes ocean.
The planet Quasar, a wild but beautiful land teeming with the wonders and powers of nature.
This inconsistency resulted from different animation studios working simultaneously without coordination or reference materials. No series Bible established planetary geography, so each studio invented environments arbitrarily. The constantly changing settings made it unclear whether episodes occurred on the same planet, or if the Herculoids randomly traveled between worlds without explanation or narrative acknowledgement. Egu's rock powers made no scientific sense. Egu was supposedly made of living stone, but displayed abilities that contradicted basic physics. He could bounce, stretch, and reshape himself despite being rock. No explanation addressed how stone could be flexible or regenerate when damaged. Writers simply ignored scientific plausibility, treating Egu's powers as magical rather than biological. This casual disregard for internal logic was typical of Hanna-Barbera's approach, creating cool visuals without bothering to establish consistent rules about how abilities actually worked. The show was packaged with Space Ghost. The Herculoids never aired as standalone series. It was always packaged with Space Ghost as Space Ghost Frankenstein Jr., or later, Space Ghost the Herculoids.
It's Magnolite, Ono.
Space Ghost!
We've been trailing this piece of Magnolite for 2 days.
This anthology format meant the Herculoids was technically a supporting segment rather than independent show. However, ratings showed children preferred the Herculoids over Space Ghost, creating awkward situation where the secondary segment was more popular than the headliner. CBS eventually gave the Herculoids equal billing, but never promoted it as standalone property. Voice actors recorded all episodes in 3 days to minimize studio rental costs. All voice recording for the entire season occurred during 3-day marathon sessions. Voice actors recorded 18 complete episodes consecutively with minimal breaks, performing the same character repeatedly until their voices gave out. This brutal schedule left no time for performance refinement or character development. Actors delivered lines mechanically as quickly as possible, prioritizing speed over quality. The rushed recording produced flat, emotionless vocal performances that made characters sound like they were reading instructions rather than experiencing danger. The creatures' names were nonsense sounds. Gloop, Gleep, Egu, Tundro, and Zoc weren't actual names, but random syllables that sounded vaguely alien. No meaning or linguistic logic existed behind the naming. Designers picked sounds that felt appropriately weird. This casual approach to world building reflected Hanna-Barbera's attitude that children didn't care about depth or consistency as long as visuals were exciting. Modern science fiction emphasizes constructed languages and meaningful naming systems, but 1960s Saturday morning animation treated such details as unnecessary effort. CBS demanded the show be toned down for season 2 after intense parental complaints about graphic violence. CBS mandated that second season episodes significantly reduce on-screen deaths and explicit destruction. Enemies could be defeated, but not visibly killed. Creatures could attack, but not graphically dismember opponents. The creative restrictions frustrated writers and animators who'd been hired specifically to create action-heavy content. The toned-down second season felt noticeably less intense, disappointing audiences who'd enjoyed the original's violent energy, while failing to satisfy concerned parents who wanted the show canceled entirely. The show was revived in 1981 with terrible results. Hanna-Barbera revived the Herculoids in 1981 as part of Space Stars, featuring drastically simplified animation and even less dialogue than the original. The revival lasted only 11 episodes before cancellation due to terrible ratings and zero merchandise sales. The failed revival demonstrated that the Herculoids' appeal was specific to 1960s Saturday morning context. By 1980s standards, the primitive animation and thin characterization felt embarrassingly outdated. The revival attempt convinced Hanna-Barbera to abandon the property permanently as unmarketable nostalgia. Zock's laser eyes were recycled from Space Ghost. Zock's eye laser effects were identical animation sequences lifted directly from Space Ghost's Power Blast effects with only color changes. This blatant asset recycling saved animation costs but created visual continuity between supposedly unrelated shows. Careful observers noticed identical laser animations appearing across multiple Hanna-Barbera productions. The recycling demonstrated how extensively the studio reused assets. Entire action sequences were interchangeable between different properties, treated as generic stock footage rather than unique show-specific content. Dorno was added, purely for child identification. Dorno, the young boy character, didn't exist in original series concepts, but was added because network testing showed children needed age-appropriate identification characters. His inclusion was pure demographic pandering. He served no narrative purpose beyond being the kid character for young viewers to project onto. Dorno rarely contributed meaningfully to problem solving and was frequently captured, requiring rescue.
Then we have to stop him, Father. The more he eats, the stronger he gets.
The tokenistic inclusion reflected television's cynical approach to children's programming, assuming kids needed characters their own age, regardless of narrative utility. No backstory was ever explained. Across 18 episodes, no information was provided about who the Herculoids were, where they came from, why they protected Quasar, or how they acquired their strange creatures. Zero world-building existed beyond the immediate premise of family with alien pets fights invaders. This narrative minimalism was intentional. Producers believed children didn't care about backstory, and exposition wasted valuable action time. Modern television emphasizes mythology and character history, but 1960s Saturday morning animation treated such elements as unnecessary complexity that distracted from monster fights. The show was more popular in international markets. The Herculoids performed significantly better internationally than domestically, particularly in Latin America and Southern Europe, where violent action content faced fewer broadcasting restrictions. The minimal dialogue made international dubbing cheap and easy. Translators only needed to dub occasional lines. International toy sales exceeded American sales substantially, making foreign markets more profitable. The international success kept the show in syndication longer than domestic popularity alone would have justified, though ultimately insufficient global revenue prevented continued production beyond 2 seasons. It proved children would watch anything with monsters. The Herculoids demonstrated that narrative quality, character development, and logical world-building were irrelevant to children's programming success. Exciting monster designs and constant action were sufficient. The show had virtually no storytelling sophistication, yet maintained respectable ratings purely through visual spectacle. This realization influenced decades of Saturday morning programming that prioritized action and creature designs over coherent plotting or meaningful characterization. The Herculoids taught studios that children's attention could be captured through pure visual stimulation without investing in quality writing. So there you have it. 20 wild facts proving the Herculoids wasn't just a bizarre Saturday morning show. It was a primitive, dialogue-free experiment that demonstrated you could capture children's attention with weird monsters and constant violence while ignoring every storytelling convention that makes television actually good. The wildest part? A show with almost no dialogue, zero character development, and rejected monster designs somehow maintained a cult following for over 50 years. Now ride your dragon rhinoceros thing to your next video. And remember, sometimes the strangest, most inexplicable shows are the ones people never forget, even if they can't explain why they loved them in the first place.